we need to make some slides to start and finish out our end of semester movie presentation. And let's use Adobe InDesign to make those slides. And there's a couple of reasons why. You might say, well, why do I need such a fancy program to make a simple slide? Can't I do my slides and boards using programs like PowerPoint or even Google Slides? Well, you absolutely could do that, and frankly, it doesn't really matter to me how you do it, just so long as it looks good. However, we do use InDesign for a lot of different things here in our profession, for creating presentations, and in particular for using content from other Adobe products, from Photoshop and Illustrator in particular. And so it actually is set up very nicely to do that. It also has some other nice compositional features that are a little more advanced than what you'll find in some of those other programs. So first of all, we'll need a starting slide where ideally you'd have the title of your project, maybe even a subtitle. And of course, it's always nice to have the class and the date. And we should also have an ending slide. And I have a couple of elements that I'd like you to include on that slide, including a perspective image and also a smaller perspective image. Both of them should be cropped differently. I'd like you to try to make a black border around one of them. I'd also like you to put in a scaled floor plan, which obviously when you're presenting electronically, the scale is kind of a little bit irrelevant, but we'll learn how to do it, and also how to put in some titles and put some nice effects onto our board. So here we are in the InDesign interface, and this is the new document menu. And you'll see here it's pretty standard. You can give the document a name, you can give the document a dimension. Here I'm going to use 36 inches wide, 24 inches high. That's kind of an architectural standard landscape format. And this will work fine for our slides, but it will also give you an idea when you go to set up your design boards. This is a common size. By the way, you can set the units to inches, which is most common, but I believe actually the default might be points. So if you're not seeing that, look for that. Another thing that you'll want to change is the facing pages option. You can just uncheck that. We don't really need that. Because that's a book layout, which Adobe InDesign is actually a book creation software, but we're not making a book. We're just making a bunch of boards. In fact, let's give ourselves 2 pages, and then you can set the margins to anything you want. In our case, 0.25 inches is about as close as our physical printer is going to get, but we can make that even smaller if we want, but I'm just going to leave it at that because that's a good kind of standard. By the way, there are other standard page sizes, including custom ones and also standard print, web, and mobile ones. So I'll click Create. And what you'll see here, I have 2 pages. I'm going to just Command minus or Control minus to zoom out so you can see the pages. If I had checked the Facing Pages option, this is what you would see. You would see a bunch of kind of paired layouts. And I'm going to go to my Pages palette here, and you'll see there's kind of a master layout for these, and as I add pages in, it adds them in sort of like a book. So, well, we don't want that. So the Adobe interface is really similar across the different programs. There is, first of all, there's different workspaces. There's the Essentials workspace. I'm in the Advanced workspace. There's tools over here, and these tools are going to look very similar to the Photoshop tools. The keyboard shortcuts are even very similar. There's kind of a toolbar area up top that gives you information about the tool you're about to use. There's pull-down menus, which usually duplicate all the other tools around, and then there's some palettes off to the right, any number of different palettes. Some of these are going to look pretty familiar. Again, layers, we have that in Photoshop. Stroke, gradient, these other sorts of things. So our main strategy for putting together our boards is to load up our sheets with drawings and other content, including text, and then we're going to arrange them in a nice and neat manner. You can move objects forward and backward. in the drawing order, and you can even add borders and effects. So let's first of all put something in this InDesign board. The way that you do that is you go to File and choose Place. Now you can also use Command D or Control D on a PC. I actually prefer doing that. And you'll want to find the drawings that are for your project. And I can go in here and I have them all put into one file. Here we go. Very nice. Place it. Now there's a little bit of a trick when you place objects into InDesign. I could click and drag, and that defines the dimension of my object. Now, if I go and I place something, and I'm just going to use Command D, so you won't see me going through the menus. And if I go and choose the floor plan here, now when you place objects that are meant to scale, the general rule of thumb is don't click and drag, just click. Now, this is a little tricky. Watch what happens when I place my plan. It's humongous. Now, why is it so big? It's so big because I haven't set it to scale yet. So scaled drawings are a little different. You have to go to Photoshop first, and I'm going to switch over there. And here's my floor plan. Now, electronic drawings just don't have a physical size that is a logical physical size. If I go to Image Size, it says it's 53 inches wide by 30 inches high. Where does that come from? It actually just has to do with the resolution and the number of pixels that were in the image when I exported it. So we need to set it to an actual dimension. Now, the only way to do that is to measure the floor plan, and I know that the floor plan is actually 80 feet long. So you'd have to multiply 80 feet times the scale. Now our scale that will work on this drawing is 1/8 of an inch equals a foot. So 80 feet times 1/8 equals 10 inches. Okay, so 1/8 of an inch per foot. Anyway, for us it needs to be 10 inches. So I need to change this width to 10 inches. However, you'll notice that there is this gray area that came in my export. So I need to get rid of that and crop the drawing down. Now I could just use the crop tool and drag it and kind of get it as close as I can. But another little trick here is to use the magic wand tool, select the gray area. Then to get just the plan and not the gray area, I can choose Select Inverse. Now you can see my little marching answer just around the plan, and I can go to Image, Crop, and it will crop it right down. And that makes for a nice, neat image that is cropped right to the edge of the plan. Now the reason that that's important is now I know exactly how to size my image. I just go to Image, Image Size. I'll check this Resample button. Very important to make sure you check that. And then set the dimension to the correct dimension, which is 10 inches. You see it sets the height automatically. And then you can come in and change the resolution to 200 pixels per inch. That's our print goal. You see it zooms in or out depending on which way you're going. And this cropped plan is the one that we want to place into our project. So now when I place the plan and I just click to place it, you see how it comes in much smaller. And in fact, if I look at my scale, my ruler here along the edge, you'll see that it should be about 10 inches. Again, any image that is orthographic, you need to open it in Photoshop first. Don't just plop it into InDesign and kind of hope for the best. If you don't open it in Photoshop, it will not be to scale. One little fun trick that you can do is you can even place Word documents in your file. And I will grab a Microsoft Word document and open. What's cool about when you place a Word document is you can define the window that the document goes into. I'll just draw this a little bit. Let me zoom in on that. By the way, when you have an object selected, InDesign will zoom in on that selection. Anyway, I haven't quite got everything from the document. You'll see this tiny little plus sign here. That is InDesign's way of telling you, hey, there's some more text in there. If you click that, now you get to draw another window for text. And this is super handy for a number of reasons, but the biggest reason that it's handy is that you can use something like Microsoft Word, and you can use the spell check and other features of that program. Now, as you get different objects onto your board, you're going to want to move them around to arrange them. One thing to notice is that the cursor has a number of features. The biggest one is, first, when you're on the selection tool, you just click on an object. It'll move the whole object and its frame. You see the cursor is black. Now, if I double click on this object, and now my cursor becomes a hand. Now I'm moving the inside. The outside of this thing is called a frame. So let me click outside of it again. The edge of this object is called a frame. And in fact, if I grab the grips here on the frame, it's going to crop the drawing. And that can be kind of annoying if you don't recognize what it's doing. You can also crop from any corner, so you crop it twice at once. Now, if you wanted to resize the image, and I wouldn't want to resize a plan because it's already set to scale, but I do want to resize this perspective, I can grab a grip but hold down the Command key or Control on a PC. Then when I click and drag the edge of the frame, it will resize it without changing the cropping. So see there, I forgot to hold down Command. Now I'll hold it down. It will resize it. Do notice, by the way, that you can warp your images. Don't do that. That doesn't look good. What you'll want to do is you can hold down Command to force it to resize the image, but also hold down Shift, and it will force it to retain its original proportion. Now, if you do want to crop the image a little bit, one thing you can do, you can change the frame cropping. But if you're like, oh, I actually want to change the way this inner picture fits, double click on it. You have your hand. You can move it around. Okay. You can also drag it up and down, and it will essentially move across the edge of the frame and crop it. Now, as you're inside the frame, you can also use the grips, just like we did before. Just remember to hold down Shift so that you don't lose your proportion. See how now I've made my image a lot smaller. If you want to get this image back to matching the frame, there are a number of what are called fitting options, which is only fitting. Go back to your selection tool, click on the frame, again, don't double click, right click, and you'll see a whole menu for fitting. And there's a number of options, but the ones that we tend to use are you're either fitting the content to the frame or fitting the frame to the content. So if I choose the frame to the content, it'll squeeze the frame tightly around that image. If I do the opposite option, fit the content to the frame, it will distort your image to fit into that frame. So be aware that you can run into some trouble by doing it. Finally, there is a drawing order to things in your view. You see how this drawing is behind the other drawing. Often you'll want to have overlaps just for board composition. You can arrange these things in different ways. The biggest one is you can bring something to the front or send it to the back. If you have multiple objects, sometimes you have to kind of cycle through to select different ones. But for the most part, this will help you arrange things pretty easily. Now, there are other things that you can put into these views. I just brought in an image directly from my Enscape rendering, but I can also bring in that Photoshop composited view, and that works just fine. This is a PSD file format Photoshop document. And again, because it's not an orthographic view, I'm just going to scale it by clicking and dragging to place it. What's nice about this is if I do go back and make any changes to my Photoshop document, I can easily update this either by right-clicking on it, or often I like to go to the links panel and it will give me a warning if something is out of date. And then you can just update it here in the links panel. So adding in text is very similar to any other program. You're going to want to click on the text tool or just tap the letter T, and you can draw a window to fill yourself with text. And then you'll want to set the size. Now this is a really big sheet, so probably even 72 point is not going to make it if I want just a title for my presentation slide. In reality, on a printed sheet, I don't think I'd go much beyond 140 odd points, but for us, we're probably going to be up around 220. And now I can start typing. And it's just like any other program. You can select the text, you can change the size on the fly. And of course, there are a million different fonts that you can choose from. So, super handy. Other things you can do, you can select your text and you can give it a background color. And I'll just, up here on the toolbar, on the menu options, I can just select the fill color. And also you can add a stroke around the box that you drew. That's a frame, just like the frames that we saw earlier. Remember that they do behave in a very similar way. But here I can give it, we'll give it a nice fuchsia color. I'm not sure I really like the frame around this, so I'm going to undo back to where we didn't have any color in there. Now, other fun features that you can do to your text is you can give it a nice little drop shadow. You can just select the text, and there's over here on the palettes area, there's something called effects. And if you're in the essentials mode, you'll want to go down to the Windows menu, and there's the effects toolbar or tool palette right there. Either way, it pops out, and what you'll see here, it will tell you some information about the object you're looking at, and you can just go over here and there is a whole kind of list of fun effects that you can apply. And you can go through many of these all on your own, but the drop shadow is the one that I happen to like. Add that back in there. There are a number of drop shadow options, including the distance. See how a shadow goes farther away or closer. You can make it a larger shadow or a smaller shadow. See how it gets a little more fuzzy as you make it nice and big. And you can even change the angle of the shadow. For some reason, they always seem to be this way. Maybe that's because that's the way InDesign likes to do it. Anyway, it's a real easy effect, and it just kind of gives you a nice little look to your drawing. You can also draw text along a curvy line. This is a fun thing to do. I'm going to call it my pen tool. And the pen tool has a couple of options. You can click sequentially and it will draw a zigzag line. You can also click and drag and it will draw what are called Bezier spline points. I'll just double click to finish, or click once to finish. Now I can use my text along a path tool. This tool is hiding underneath the main text tool. You just click and drag on that teeny tiny little triangle to open up that type on a path tool. You will want to make sure that your font is something reasonable. Now, I didn't have a stroke applied to my path, so you do have to make sure that you mouse over the actual pathway when you can find it. There's a little plus sign that will show up when you find it. And now you can just start typing, and maybe I'll make my font a wee bit bigger so that I can see what I'm doing. The quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dog. And what's cool is that it does follow that path, either the straight sections or the curvy sections. Now, what if you want something like a line underneath this? Maybe it's a title. It's very easy to draw lines in InDesign. You just go and there is a, you guessed it, a line tool. And you can just click and drag. If you hold down Shift, it will force it to go at kind of the orthogonal direction and at 90 degrees. When you're done with the line, you might say, well, that is a pretty unimpressive line. It's because it has no stroke. If you look up here, the stroke by default is 0 points. You can change that by just clicking from the drop-down list. Oh, and I guess the color is set to fuchsia. That's lovely. So anyway, this is the simplest way that you can draw a line. And these grips are active. You can stretch them out. And you can even drag them, drag the whole line around. And there are nudge keys. And that is one of my favorite things because you can nudge this up just a little bit at a time to get it right under your letter. This particular font does not have an underline, so I need to draw one in. You can also draw things like shapes and gradients. Now, I often like to do these on the sort of master page here. If I go to my Pages palette, what you'll see is there's something called the master. If you have a two-page project, a left and right page, there'll be two masters, a left and a right master. All I have to do is I'm going to double-click on this A master, and what it will do is it will take me to a sheet with nothing on it. And then anything that I draw on this sheet will be applied to any page that has the master applied. So, for example, I could come in and draw a rectangle as the background. I'll just draw a great big rectangle, cover up the whole thing, and I could set it to have some fill color and some stroke if I wanted. Let's just go with yellow because it really shows up brightly on everybody's screen. It's a little annoying, but basically what you can see here in my Pages menu is that when I applied it to the master, it automatically applied it to the other page. One thing I like to do when I'm working on the background of the sheet, the master slide, is I like to put in a fun border, but you really can't do that very well in InDesign. You have to go to its sister program, sister application, Adobe Illustrator. And you can see a lot of the tools here look very similar. There's text tools and pens and even a line segment tool and a rectangle that look just like Adobe InDesign. However, now when I select a rectangle that I've drawn, there are the same stroke and fill options. However, there are all these cool brushes. And I'm going to call up the whole brush menu so that you can see all the fun stuff that is available here in Illustrator. And Illustrator is a great program for this kind of thing. Now there's a few that are already in here. You just click on them and they will change the way the line looks. This looks kind of hand-drawn. I can also go to this library and there are just hundreds of brushes in here. Let's go with some borders, maybe some novelty borders. How about that? We'll stretch these out, show you what this looks like. And all you do is you just click on one of these and that's what your border becomes. It can be a super fun way to create some interest in your project. And all of these vary depending on the stroke. So if you want hearts, but you want bigger hearts, just change the point size and now you have really big hearts. And you can also just use parts of these to create icons for your project. We often use these icons in our projects for, I don't know, circulation or other sorts of things. You can draw all sorts of great stuff in Adobe Illustrator and load them directly into your InDesign project. So once I'm here on my master page, I can add in the border that I created in Adobe Illustrator, and I can also add in a background area that I made using Photoshop. Photoshop also has some nice features for painting and drawing, which we have seen earlier. I'll just add those in now. And once you've got your page format the way you like it, you can just click outside of the master, go to one of these pages, and you should see, just double click on it, you should see the page with the new format applied. I also have a blank page here for my final page. I'm going to bring in those icons that I created in Illustrator. One thing you'll notice, by the way, is that there can be multiple artboards in Illustrator. This is great when you're creating a bunch of icons. They often come this way when you download them off the internet. If you want the option to choose which artboard you're bringing in, make sure you check the Show Import options here in the Import or in the Place dialog box. Click Open, and now it will ask you which artboard do you want. You can scroll through them, and you can tell it just the previewed page or all of them. And there's other options too, but that's good for the likes of us. And now we have some icons that we can move around our project. What's nice is as you move these objects around, if you update them, that's really handy. Often we make multiple copies of these icons. To do that, by the way, click on your Select tool, but then hold down the Alt key and click and drag, and you should have a copy. Okay. Again, really nice if you decide to make a change, they'll all change automatically. Now, as long as we are creating some fun little shapes, another fun thing we can do is create an irregular boundary for a drawing. We can use that same pen tool that we used earlier. And again, just click and drag a shape that you like. And it can be, I don't know, a bean shape. The trick is, select that object, and right now it doesn't have any stroke to it. Let's give it a little bit of a stroke so that we can see it. you can right-click on it and tell InDesign that this is going to be a graphic. And now when you place an object, it'll go right into that box or circle. And like we've seen before, you're going to want to adjust both the perimeter of the image, but you can also go inside, change its shape or its location within that frame, or as in this case, because it's just a funny shaped frame, we're going to want to fit it, and I'm going to fit the content to this funny shaped frame. You see how that can be a real fun effect. Now, I don't particularly like having the border on here. You can add a border to any drawing by just changing that stroke number that we looked at before. And of course you can also add a drop shadow to it. But I want to try a different effect on this one. It's called feather. So let me remove the stroke, come to my effects menu, and under the little FX option, there's something called basic feather. And what this does is it fades the perimeter of the drawing ever so slightly. I'll just increase this number so that you can see how it just gets ever so soft around the edge. Isn't that nice? And that can be a very nice effect on your board. By the way, the line that you're seeing is the frame. Those are visible by default. You can hide them. I tend to leave them on because they're really handy to be able to edit your drawing. However, one thing you will notice is that sometimes the graphics can look a little fuzzy. Now this actually doesn't look too bad, but if the graphics are looking a little fuzzy, under the View pull-down menu, there is an option for display performance. Mine is already set to high quality display, but if yours is looking fuzzy, it might be under this fast display. You can set that to high quality. I will warn you, it will slow down your computer. One last effect you can do to objects is you can go to the Object pull-down menu, and there are a number of fun things you can do here. One that is fun to play with is this corner options. Again, these are just things you can play with. You can tell it to have a beveled corner that's a particular dimension. For example, we can make it have a 1-inch beveled corner. And just check the preview button so you can see what that looks like. And is that the greatest thing since sliced bread? Maybe not. But again, these are just fun ways to create an interesting effect in your project. Finally, organizationally, there are a number of things you can do. You can put objects on layers, which will make them easy to turn on and off. You can also just select multiple objects, hold down Shift to select these objects, and you can group them, or Command-G, Control-G will get you the same effect. This is just like groups that we've seen in our other programs. Just makes it easier to move them around, and you can copy them by holding down Alt. And just note that to edit the new group, you'll probably want to ungroup it, and now you can fiddle around with this content. One other thing that you can do as you're touching up and finishing up your board is you can copy the style of this particular image to another image. The way that you do that, you set it up the way you want. I have a stroke and a stroke color and even a drop shadow. And what I can do, I can go to the Object Styles menu and click on the Create New Style. And you can even give that thing a name like Brody Style. Whoops. But then you can apply that style to some other object. You just select the other object and it becomes a style available in your Styles menu. This is a great way to make sure that your drawings kind of match. Now, another great thing to do is to make sure that your drawings align with each other. Let's say I want all three of these to align. I can select them by drawing a window. Now, every window in InDesign is a selection window. I don't believe there's a crossing window. But to align objects, multiple objects at once, there is actually a special menu called the Align menu. This is under Object and Layout. And it's Align, and it's got its own keyboard shortcut, which is indicative of the fact that you use it a lot. And what you'll see is that there are a number of different ways you can align objects. You can align them by their top edges, by the center, or by the bottom. And here, we'll click all three and see what they look like. You see how I click that, and they are suddenly all perfectly aligned along the top. And that will be the top of the frames. Now I can align them along the center, And now I can align them along the bottom. You see how they each move as I do that. And you can also do that vertically, and you can distribute objects evenly in different ways also. So I have laid out my slides and I am ready to print and also to put them into my project for our class, the animated standalone presentation. How do you get them out of InDesign? Well, you can't really print from InDesign. There is no print option, at least not directly. But what you can do is export. Command E or Control E. And you can choose a file format which makes sense for you. Now, PDF for print, it makes a lot of sense if you're printing, right? And that will create a multi-page PDF file. Now for us, the best thing that we can do is save them as either a JPEG or a PNG. I'm going to save them as a JPEG just for convenience. It makes a nice small file size. Now, when you get to the Export JPEG menu, you're going to want to consider a couple of things. First of all, do you want all pages or not? Now, I have 2 pages. Spreads are when you have a 2-page layout, so that doesn't work for us. You can also set the quality as high as you want. Now, for our project, if you lay it out at 24 by 36, the low quality setting is fine because we already have a very big project. However, for me, I'm going to just set it at low. Also, you can set the resolution. Unfortunately, it doesn't have 200 as a regular option, but 200 is the resolution that you'll want to get used to always using. Finally, these other options you can just leave as is and click Export, and that will give you a couple of JPEG files that you can insert into your movie project.